You hear people online talking about huge life-changing adventures, but what does that even mean, to have your life changed by an adventure? It's rare to hear the real, tangible, here's how my life exactly changed. That's what I'm going to be talking about in this video, exactly how my huge adventure changed my life, so you can learn right here, right now, what I did then. In 2014, I set off with my then boyfriend to sail what would turn into 20,000 miles. I wasn't a sailor at the time and I'd never really sailed. I actually learnt to sail on that trip pretty much. Instead, I was a timid 23-year-old woman who wasn't intentional about anything, and instead I just said yes to whatever people asked of me because I didn't really have any integrity of my own. It was just the two of us sailing on a 10-metre yacht for 3 years, essentially. We left the UK south to Spain and then to Portugal, the Portuguese islands of Madeira, and then the Canary Islands. From there, we spent 28 days sailing across to Grenada in the Caribbean. And we spent several months sailing up those islands in the Caribbean, up to Martinique, Guadeloupe, Antigua, and then Saint Martin at the top. When it came time to sail back across the North Atlantic, the weather was looking pretty bad, so instead we sailed 12 days to Panama. And by the time we got to Panama, we'd already been gone from home for a year. We spent the hurricane season in Panama sheltering from the strong winds before making our return home, back across the Caribbean Sea to the Bahamas, waiting in the Bahamas for 4 months, and then sailing back across the Atlantic to the Portuguese island chain of the Azores, which are kind of mid-Atlantic. We left the boat there during winter and flew home, and then when we returned, we sailed the boat back to Spain and then back to the UK. All in all, we covered around 20,000 miles. 2 people on 1 boat. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of that adventure here because it was a long adventure. We saw some absolutely extraordinary things, visited some phenomenal countries, some phenomenal islands, and that would be a very different and much, much longer video. If you do want to know more about that trip though, I actually wrote a book about it, which you can find in the description below, and that was published in 2018. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into that adventure. In this video though, I'm going to talk about how that trip changed my life. So not just during it where, wow, all of this world is so incredible and I didn't know it was going to be like this. Of course, every time you go somewhere else that you're unfamiliar with, you're going to feel like that. But instead, I'm going to talk about the tangible differences in the way I live my life now compared to the way I lived my life before. And I'm going to break it down into 3 sections. As a young woman who had just graduated university, I had absolutely no direction in my life. And I had no faith or trust in myself. I was incredibly insecure, and instead of making decisions that I wanted, I would just go wherever the wind took me, go wherever somebody else suggested I should go. I truly believed that anybody else had a better idea of what I should be doing with my life than me. And while that behaviour may have got me on this adventure in the first place, it's not something that I really recommend. And that is the first thing that this adventure truly taught me. Be on your own side. Let me explain. When you're at sea on a small boat with just one other person, or by yourself, I guess, you really have to make every single decision. The two of you have to work out together what is the best course of action for essentially you both to stay alive. There is no higher authority. There's no internet that you can use to look anything up. We didn't have any internet. We didn't even have a sat phone. When we were thousands of miles from the nearest land in the middle of the Atlantic, there was nothing else. There was no one to ask. We had to work things out ourselves and trust that we could cope with whatever would come up. Sometimes this was just me by myself on a night watch when my partner was sleeping. And I would have to make decisions about the sail plan, or does that cloud look pretty dangerous? Is that a squall coming? What should we be doing here? Making decisions about which islands and which countries to visit in places that we were very unfamiliar with. These decisions could be quite high stakes sometimes, especially in a place which experiences extreme weather phenomena like the Caribbean. On a day-to-day basis, there's really just no one else to ask, and so I had to trust my own instincts and trust my own knowledge. This was something that you so rarely have to do when you're living a normal life on land with access to the internet and loads of other people, because you can always defer to somebody else. And when you defer to somebody else, that means you can blame that person or that source of information when you get something wrong, instead of taking that responsibility on yourself. When you're out there on the ocean though, There's no one else to blame. It is you and the person or people that you're sailing with. That is it. Because you have to work as a team, this really forces you to take responsibility for your actions and actually make decisions. It also forces you to stand up for yourself and to do the things that you personally believe are correct. There's no backup plan and there is nothing to fall back on. I found this immensely freeing, although it took me some time to come to that conclusion. What I really realised is that in a sticky situation, I can trust myself, I can rely on myself, and I'm now on my own side. And this is fantastic for everything on land as well, because so often we're not on our own sides. We look for advice and we ask other people's opinions and we wonder what that person is going to think of me if I wear this thing or do that or quit my job or apply for that job or switch to this or do this hobby. All of those things. We concern ourselves with what other people might think, but we're not being on our side. Imagine if your best friend asks you, hey, do I look good in this dress? And you said, I don't know, maybe we should ask someone else's opinion. What? No, you're going to be on her side, aren't you? So what sailing trans-ocean for 3 years taught me is that being on my own side is the most important thing, because at the end of the day, nobody else is out there. Nobody else is truly on your side as much as you are. You are the only person in your life that is 100% present in every single second. If you're not on your own side, you're gonna flounder. The second thing my life-changing trip taught me is that I can do hard things, and that means you can as well. Just like with being on your own side or not being on your own side, the world that we live in now sort of prevents us from having to do really difficult things unless we are absolutely in a corner. But most of the time we can avoid hard things really easily, and we all look for shortcuts and easier versions of things. But this doesn't really help us. You don't learn very much when you take a shortcut or when you take the easy way out or when you pick the easy, familiar, safe option. That does not encourage growth. And without growth and challenge, it's hard to develop self-confidence, self-assuredness, and resilience. I was constantly challenged during this sailing trip. Across the Atlantic and on long voyages, I would be on a 3-hour watch, so I was awake for 3 hours and asleep for 3 hours and awake for 3 hours and asleep for 3 hours every single day and night, 24 hours a day for 28 days. That is extremely challenging. We had gale force winds at one point. We encountered really, really horrible depressions that would bring howling winds and heavy rain. We sailed through a lightning storm in the middle of the night. We crossed the English Channel in fog, so you couldn't even see the bow of the boat. But also I experienced the incredible challenge of moving from culture to culture to culture regularly, of visiting different islands and different countries and not returning home or seeing anyone I knew for months, years at a time. I also just lived with the daily challenge of not having a shower, not having a proper fridge, not having comforts of home, and loneliness. Arguments with my partner where no one could slam a door because we were on a tiny boat. Depression, anxiety, all of these things. And then there were the physical challenges and the physical discomfort and the fear, the constant nagging fear. Sometimes it was chronic, sometimes it was acute, but it was always there in the background. At some points, I thought we might die. These are all challenging things, and I'm not suggesting that you put yourself in quite that extreme of a challenging environment, but if and when you do that, you will be okay and you will get through it, because when you put yourself in a challenging environment, you become far more creative than you are normally. You discover that actually, in fact, you are a problem solver and that you can get yourself out of really tricky situations when you put your mind to it and when you're in those situations in the first place. But you have to allow yourself to enter that challenging arena in order to find those things out about yourself, and in order to really, really feel and believe that you are capable of it. The third and probably most life-changing thing I learned on that adventure is to be intentional. And it's kind of ironic because when I went onto that adventure, I was not intentional. We didn't set out to sail 20,000 miles. We set out to basically go away for a few months and see what happened. What happened was that we ended up sailing across the Atlantic to Panama and then returning over the stretch of 3 years. But I wasn't intentional on going out on that adventure. I was just a yes man at the time. But the further we sailed, the more I realised that the decisions I made a real impact on my immediate and long-term future. And that's one of the most powerful things that I've taken away since. When I got back to the UK in 2017, I experienced a major family loss, and then I went through the breakup with the person I'd just been sailing with for years. It was an extremely difficult and lonely time. However, during that time, I realised that I needed to take control over my life and become more intentional, not just going wherever the wind blew me. I needed to stop letting life happen to me, and I needed to happen the shit out of life. So during that time, I gave up alcohol, and that was probably the single best decision I've ever made in my life, and it was also one of the most intentional. Giving up alcohol was tough because it had played a major role in my life up until that point. But once you go on a huge adventure and you get through a lot of challenging things, you can do other challenging things, and you know that. After giving up alcohol, I got more strategic about the places that I was submitting the book that I had written about my adventure. It had been rejected from so many publishers, I'd completely given up with it for a full year, I think. But because I'd taken control of my life by giving up drinking, I now knew that I could get more intentional about publishing my book. I became more strategic and sent it off to publishers that were much more likely to publish it. And I got 2 book deal offers on the same day. 6 months later, I decided that I needed to do something physical for myself, so I began running. I was not a runner at all. I was always a cyclist, although I'd really even stopped doing that for more than anything just getting around town. But I decided to take up running. I found out what I needed to buy, some good shoes, and I started off small and slow. I didn't go big, I didn't injure myself, I started off small and slow. And I repeated that for months. Now running is a huge part of my life, and it has enabled me to do other sports such as competitive cycling and triathlon. Learning how to run in 2018 allowed me to teach myself how to do front crawl for triathlon. And all these things start with intention. Hey, I want to try this, so I need to learn that, and I could do this because I'm being intentional about it. When you become intentional, the results you get are much more precise. When you're really vague and do things in a vague manner, the results are also really vague. Thinking about it, it makes so much sense. It's not until you really do these things and believe these things that you can see, oh yeah, of course this is how it works. So I'm going to leave this video there because I could talk about this forever and I could talk about my trip forever. But what I really want to leave you with is that life-changing trips and life-changing anything, a lot of people don't pinpoint what it is about their life that has changed. And it's not just helpful for other people to hear, but it's helpful for you too if you've been on a trip like that, or something has happened to you that has genuinely changed your life. If you can really pinpoint how it's changed your life and how it affects the decisions that you make going forward, even in unrelated spheres, it's so beneficial. So to recap, be on your own side. Do hard things and be intentional. With those 3 things, you can go so far. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.